HOA employee scammed me for $3,000. Then they tried to evict me from my own home. Misled 1. I never thought I'd be the type of person who'd end up in a war with my HOA, but here we are. This whole thing started with what I thought was just a misunderstanding, but it wasn't. It was a well-planned scam by someone working right inside the HOA office. Someone I trusted, and it cost me $3,000, a mountain of stress, and nearly my home. I've lived in this neighborhood for 8 years. It's a quiet, well-maintained community. We've got a couple dozen houses, a nice pool, small park, and even a clubhouse that the HOA rents out for events. I bought my townhouse back when I got promoted at work. It was a dream come true. Middle class, safe area, and everything close by. Grocery store 5 minutes away. Work is just a 15-minute drive. I loved this place. Until this nightmare began. More of those residents who didn't really pay attention to HOA stuff. I paid my monthly dues on time, read the occasional newsletter, and figured that was enough. I didn't attend the meetings. I didn't know the names of the board members. I didn't even know the HOA office was just 3 blocks away, tucked behind the pool house. I was just living my life, working, coming home, sometimes walking around the park, or joining my neighbor's barbecue. Then, about 5 months ago, I got a letter. It was plain white, stamped with the HOA logo. Inside was a notice of violation for a supposed fence height issue. I had to correct the violation immediately or face a fine of $50 per day. But here's the thing. I didn't have a fence, not even a small one. My backyard was completely open, shared with the adjoining townhouse. I thought it was a clerical error. So I called the HOA office. A woman named Denise answered. She had a sharp voice, very businesslike, but not rude. I explained the mistake. She put me on hold for a while and came back saying the system had flagged my property incorrectly. She apologized and said she'd remove the violation. I thanked her and didn't think much of it. Weeks later, I got another letter. This time it was about unpaid HOA dues. It claimed I hadn't paid in 3 months and owed over $1,000 with late fees. That was insane. I pay online every month, auto debit. I even pulled up my bank statements. There it was, January, February, March, all paid. I called again. Same woman, Denise. Sporting told me it must be a system issue and that she would take care of it manually. I asked for confirmation in writing. She said they don't do that for internal adjustments, but not to worry. Something about her tone this time didn't sit right with me. But I had my payment receipts, so I figured I was covered if it ever came up again. Psychologically, strangest thing happened. 3 days later, Denise called me back.
There was still a discrepancy. I'd need to make a temporary payment of $3,000 to cover my outstanding balance and secure my account standing, and it would be refunded once the audit cleared. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would anyone fall for that? But she sounded official, calm, even helpful. She said things like, if you don't settle it soon, it could trigger a lien or legal action, and we really want to avoid that. She offered to walk me through the payment step by step and said she'd file a refund request for me afterwards. She even emailed me from the official HOA email address with a PDF that looked very legit. I panicked. The last thing I wanted was to lose my house over some stupid computer glitch, and honestly, I didn't want to fight some bureaucratic HOA board if I could just fix it with a payment and deal with the refund later. So I paid. Thaloons, dollars, wire transfer, right into the account number she gave me. She confirmed it with a thank you, we'll send you a notice once the refund is processed. Flush went by, then weeks. No refund, no email, no updates. I called the office, no answer. I went by in person, the door was locked. The HOA sign was still on the building, but the inside looked abandoned. It was like nobody had been there in days. I asked around the neighborhood. My neighbor Todd, an older guy who'd been here longer than me, said the HOA had been changing staff recently and some meetings had been canceled. He didn't know anything about a financial issue or audit. I finally sent an official letter requesting my refund and included all the documentation. That's when everything blew up. I got a reply from the HOA board president, someone I'd never spoken to before, saying there was no record of any such payment or audit. They had no one named Denise currently on staff. I froze. Planes? What? I sent him the email Denise used. It matched the HOA domain. He said that the email had been compromised and was no longer in use. Cammed. By someone working inside the HOA office. Someone who had full access to names, addresses, dues records, emails. And they'd cleaned out their desk and disappeared. It gets worse. 1 month after that, I got a notice to vacate. Cabinets, the HOA now believed I was over 4 months behind on my dues and had refused to resolve it. They were initiating proceedings to place a lien and evict me from my own home. I completely lost it. Could they do that? I had proof I'd paid. I had bank records. I had screenshots. I even sent them all again. But the HOA board claimed the money was never received, and since they didn't authorize the employee's request, it didn't count. They basically said, you're still on the hook. Angwin's stunned. It felt like I was living in a nightmare. Not only had I been scammed, but the people who should have helped me, my own HOA, were now using the scam as evidence that I wasn't paying. They didn't care who took the money. They just wanted me gone. And I wasn't going anywhere. So I hired a lawyer. It cost me almost another $1,500 just to get started, but I was done playing nice. I was going to fight back. We requested full documentation from the HOA. Employee records, payment logs, surveillance footage from the office, internal communications. They stalled, delayed, gave us the runaround. But the more we dug, the more we found. Emails from Denise that weren't sent from a personal address. They were sent from inside the HOA server. A signature on an internal document that matched the wire account info. Surveillance footage showing her in the office after she supposedly quit. Then,
we found something else. This scam had happened before. The thing that made my blood boil was learning I wasn't the first. While reviewing old documents with my lawyer, we came across a resident complaint from nearly a year ago. It had been buried inside a folder labeled Resolved Claims, but there was nothing about it being resolved. In fact, it was a handwritten letter, scanned and emailed to the board by a man named Charles, who had lived just 2 streets away from me. He claimed an HOA staff member had charged him a $500 urgent grounds repair fee, only for him to later find out no such project existed. He was ignored. He moved out 3 months later. So this wasn't new. Someone, likely the same person, had been using insider access to extort payments from residents who trusted the system. The board brushed it off or conveniently missed the signs. Either they were asleep at the wheel, or they didn't want to admit their staff was exploiting homeowners. I asked the board for Charles' forwarding address, but they claimed they didn't have it. I tracked him down on my own through an old neighborhood Facebook group. He was more than happy to talk. Everything, how the same woman, Denise, had approached him, claiming a tree root from his property had caused underground pipe damage, and that the HOA required him to pay immediately. She had documentation, an invoice, even referenced a clause in the community's bylaws. He paid in cash. No repairs ever happened. No such clause existed. He also said that when he tried to get answers, he was stonewalled, then received notices accusing him of violating landscaping rules. The harassment pushed him to move. Flooring was stunned. Now we had a pattern, a paper trail. So we pushed harder. We subpoenaed HOA employee records, payment system logs, board meeting minutes. Every time we got close, the board seemed more nervous. They tried to deflect. We're not responsible for the actions of former staff. That account wasn't authorized. You should have confirmed it through the board, not just an employee. They were trying to shift the
Blame completely off themselves. But what they didn't expect was that we'd find a copy of Denise's employment contract, signed just 2 weeks before my payment. Guess who signed it on behalf of the board? The HOA president. Suddenly, the "we didn't know her" excuse fell apart. This wasn't some outside scam artist. This was a trusted employee hired directly by the board, working in the official office, using official emails, and receiving residents in an official capacity. And now, they wanted to pretend she never existed? Yeah, that wasn't going to fly. Still, they didn't budge on the eviction notice. They gave me a final warning: pay the balance, or the lien would proceed. I had a decision to make. My lawyer offered to file a restraining order against the HOA and request a court injunction. That would stop the eviction temporarily, but it would cost more legal fees, another $2,000 minimum, and no guarantee. I was drained, emotionally, financially. I couldn't believe how fast everything was spiraling. I sat in my living room, the one I worked years to earn, and felt like I was suffocating. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about principle. This was about them trying to erase what they'd done. So I decided to take it public. I called a local news outlet. I told them everything: the scam, the employee, the letters, the attempted eviction. At first, they were skeptical. HOA drama doesn't always make good stories. But when I sent them the documents, Denise's contract, the emails, the payment receipt, the complaint from Charles, their tone changed. They sent a reporter to interview me. That same week, a news van parked across from my house. A cameraman followed me to the now-abandoned HOA office. I showed them the locked doors, the empty lobby, the old sign that still hung on the window. The story aired that night. It was explosive. HOA employee allegedly scams residents. HOA threatens eviction anyway. My inbox exploded. So there were more victims. A retired woman emailed me saying she had once paid a roof permit fee that didn't show up in her HOA account. She never reported it because she thought she was just old and forgetful. A single mother said she had been fined twice for grass maintenance that never happened. And the person who left the citation? Denise. The story gained momentum. The HOA board went into full damage control mode. They released a formal statement denying wrongdoing, saying they were reviewing historical employment procedures and deeply regret any inconvenience to residents. Probation? But the eviction? On. Blankets they had no legal...
Were scared I'd keep talking. So I did. I printed flyers. I stood outside the HOA office with a sign that read, "Scammed by your own HOA? You're not alone. Ask me how." Cars slowed down. People came up. Neighbors started sharing their own stories. One even said, "I thought I was the only one." Another gave me a photo, a screenshot from a backyard camera of Denise dropping off a notice. The community was waking up. Then, the unexpected happened. An emergency board meeting was announced. It was packed. Dozens of homeowners showed up, many of whom had never attended before. Some stood, others sat on windowsills. The air buzzed with tension. I sat in the front row. The board president, the same guy who signed Denise's contract, looked like he hadn't slept in days. His hands trembled as he shuffled papers. He tried to talk about clarity and due process, but people interrupted. "What happened to my driveway repair request?" Flushed. "Why did Denise have access to my property? Why is there still an eviction notice on his door?" Northeastern poured in. And then I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't rant. I just read the timeline of events. From the first fake violation, to the payment, to the abandonment of the office, to the threatened eviction. I ended with this. Hired her. You gave her access. You let this happen. And now, you want to punish me for it? Silence. Someone clapped. Then someone joined in. Within seconds, half the room was on its feet. The board president looked like he was about to pass out. Blackmail, where the board members, a woman named Teresa, who'd stayed quiet until now, leaned into her mic and said, I motion to drop the eviction notice and formally audit all resident charges going back 2 years. The room erupted. The motion passed, flushed, unanimously. The president didn't speak again. They dropped the eviction. Now, confiscated because while I was finally safe in my home again, I still wanted answers. Where did that $3,000 go? And what happened to Denise? Part 2. After the emergency board meeting, everything in the neighborhood changed. People started waving when I walked my dog. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly knocking on my door, asking for advice on how to read their HOA account statements. Someone even called me the guy who exposed the scam. I didn't want to be some local hero, but it felt good to finally be seen. Not as a problem, not as a delinquent, but as someone who told the truth. But I wasn't done. Had been dropped, yes, but the $3,000 was still missing. No refund, no apology anymore. I'd already lost too much. If I let this go now, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. So we dug in. The first step was filing a civil suit, not just against Denise, but against the entire HOA board for negligence and for failing to protect resident funds. We also requested the HOA's insurance policy information. Why? Because many HOA boards carry errors and omissions insurance, meaning if the board screws up, their insurance covers the damage. Guess what? They did have that coverage, and they never mentioned it. Not once. That meant the HOA could have reimbursed me from day one, but they didn't. They'd rather accuse me of being delinquent than take the financial hit. We sent a demand letter to their attorney. 30 days to reimburse the full $3,000 and issue a public correction, or we would sue for not just the money, but for damages, including the emotional toll, reputational damage, and legal fees. We gave them until the end of the month. Leaning the board held a closed-door session to discuss the letter. I wasn't allowed in, but word leaked out fast. Teresa, the same board member who motioned to drop my eviction, called me personally. She said things were getting ugly behind the scenes. Apparently, the board president had known Denise personally before she was hired. Some said she was a friend. Others whispered they had dated. Whatever the truth was, her hiring process had skipped the usual background checks. That alone was a massive violation of protocol. Teresa admitted that Denise never submitted a full resume. Her file just had a handwritten application and the signed contract. So we did our own digging. Address from Denise's employment file, one she listed under emergency contact. It was 2 towns over. We hired a PI to go check it out. Bingo. Denise was living in a 1-bedroom rental under a slightly different name. Denise Colburn instead of Denise Coulter. Same person. Same face, same voice, confirmed when we got a brief audio clip from a neighbor's door camera, matched to her voicemail from when she called me months ago. We served her the civil suit directly. Her response? She lawyered up fast and filed a counterclaim against the HOA. That right. Flushing the HOA board knew she was collecting side payments and looked the other way. She even provided emails and text messages from the board president acknowledging these extra payments as expedited fines. Sure story was that a bigger scheme hit the floor. We got copies of those messages through Discovery, and holy hell, it looked bad for the board. There were at least 4 messages from the board president saying things like, make sure they pay fast, don't give them time to ask questions. Quarantine. Use the back gate drop box only, not the main one. Flexibility. If it's less than $5,000, we won't audit it. Failing, real, was obvious. He wasn't just complicit, he was orchestrating it. This went way beyond Denise. Suddenly, our lawsuit ballooned from a $3,000 case to something much bigger. Now, we had a conspiracy, fraud, negligence, possible embezzlement. We filed an amendment to include the board president personally in the civil suit. His name, Robert L. Finch, a guy who'd been president of the HOA for 6 years, re-elected every time because nobody ever challenged him. Nobody cared about HOA elections, but I did now. I decided to run. Yep, I printed flyers, knocked on doors, set up a simple website explaining my story, not in a bitter way, but in a clear, factual tone. My slogan? Blankets, and not more secrets, no more scams. The community rallied behind me. Even the elderly couple at the end of the cul-de-sac, who never left their house unless it was trash day, told me they'd vote. Election night came, and the room was packed again. The ballot count wasn't even close. I won. I was now president of the HOA. Let that sink in. 8 months ago, they tried to evict me from this community. Now, I was in charge of it. My first action? I froze all discretionary spending until an independent audit could be completed. Then, I called a town hall meeting and presented the evidence. All of it. Denise's scam, Robert's messages, the internal failures. The board was speechless. Residents were stunned, angry. Some were in tears, not just over the money, but the betrayal. We voted unanimously to remove Robert from the board completely. Later that month, he was arrested. Not just because of our civil case,
but because my lawyer referred everything to the district attorney's office. When the financial audit concluded, it showed over $86,000 in undocumented, expedited fines collected over 2 years, nearly all through Denise's hands. The DA pressed charges against both Robert and Denise for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit theft. Nee was plea deals. Denise was sentenced to 3 years probation, mandatory restitution, and banned from working for any HOA or property group again. Robert got 6 months in county jail and was forced to repay part of the embezzled funds. Flooring is for me. I finally got my $3,000 back, plus a public apology and a written correction to clear my name. That wasn't the real win. Flooring, the real win was giving this community its voice back. We updated the HOA bylaws, implemented monthly financial transparency reports, and created a grievance committee made up of residents, not just board members. For the first time in years, the HOA felt like it belonged to the people who actually lived here. President of the HOA didn't. Attendance at meetings dropped again after the court verdict. Even though Denise and Robert were gone, some residents still wondered how deep the rot went. I didn't blame them. A few neighbors privately told me, "You did a good thing, but I still don't trust HOAs. Never have." Prejudice, I knew I had work to do. We started small. We held open office hours in the community clubhouse. I personally met with anyone who had unresolved complaints or suspicious past charges. I reviewed every open violation on file. We even wiped a few fines entirely after realizing they were signed by Denise or Robert under shady circumstances. One couple, the Bakers, broke down in tears when we reversed a $1,400 late fee from 2 years ago. They had been told their dues were short, even though their bank statements proved otherwise. They were too embarrassed to challenge the board at the time. They nearly sold their home over it. And all this time, they had just been victims. Fixing those wrongs made me feel like I was finally doing something meaningful. Then we made a big change. Forged hired an independent auditor, not one of those recommended by the HOA legal group types. I wanted someone with no ties, no bias. We gave him full access to every folder, every backup drive, every financial ledger going back 5 years. And that's when we found it. Blackmail binder, hidden in a locked cabinet in the main HOA office. It wasn't labeled. Inside were handwritten notes, meeting records, and receipts, most of them never digitized. There was no mention of it in the official HOA logs, but it told a story none of us were ready for. Turns out, Denise wasn't the first. Miss Conscam had started long before her. At least 2 previous employees had done similar things, collecting unauthorized fines, sending out threats of foreclosure, and getting side payments through personal accounts. Some of the checks were even made out directly to initials like MG or LP, names that didn't match any board members. We ran those initials through a resident database and confirmed it. They were relatives of Robert, nonprofits, cousins, people who had briefly worked for the HOA as assistants or contractors, while they'd been running an inside hustle for at least 4 years. It was subtle. They only targeted a handful of homeowners at a time, enough to avoid attention, but enough to make tens of thousands over time. The binder even had a list of high-compliance residents, people unlikely to question the charges. I was on that list. So was Charles. So was the elderly couple emergency window replacement that never happened. These weren't random mistakes. This was calculated. Turbulence of everything. My lawyer compiled a new report and sent it to the DA's office again. While Robert and Denise had already been... I also posted a summary to the community Facebook group, being careful to redact names until we had legal confirmation. I explained the findings, the history of the scam, and the changes we were making to protect everyone moving forward. The reaction was overwhelming. Some people were shocked. Others said they always suspected something. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. They wanted this community cleaned up once and for all. So we launched what I called the transparency plan. Every quarter, residents would get a physical and digital report of every dollar spent. Contractor bids would be reviewed by a rotating group of volunteers, not just board members. All violations had to include photographic evidence, not just written notes. And any employee hired by the HOA had to pass a background check and be approved by the full board. It was a lot of work. But it was worth it. Within 6 months, the neighborhood changed again. People started showing up to meetings. Residents who once ignored notices now felt confident reading them. The clubhouse was being used again for potlucks, movie nights, even a weekend farmer's market organized by a high schooler. And then something unexpected happened. I received a letter. It wasn't from the HOA or a lawyer or the DA's office. It was from Denise. I froze when I saw her name on the return address. Inside was a single-page note, handwritten. She apologized. Not just a fake, legal apology, a real one. She admitted to everything, the scam, the lies, the intimidation. She said she took the job at the HOA during a desperate time after losing her previous job and facing foreclosure on her own home. Fiberglass found out and offered her a deal. She'd do the dirty work, and he'd protect her. She said at first it was small, little extra fines here and there, but it grew. And once it started, she couldn't stop. She felt trapped, scared, guilty, but the part that hit me hardest, they intended to ruin anyone's life, especially mine. She said I was the only one who fought back, and that maybe if she'd been caught earlier, things wouldn't have gotten so bad. Angry. I didn't write back. That letter wasn't for sympathy. It was for closure. And in a strange way, I got it. But just when I thought everything had finally calmed down, I got a call. Fiberglass. It was the auditor. "Hey," he said, "I just found something strange in the digital backups from 2019. "What is it?" I asked. "There's a property listed under the HOA asset ledger, but it's not part of the community. It's in a completely different zip code, rural. Looks abandoned." "Are you saying the HOA owns land outside the neighborhood?" "Not officially, but the deed is listed under the HOA's name, signed. It's not by Robert." "Wait, are you saying he bought land with our HOA funds?" "I can't prove that yet," he said, "but something's definitely off." Just like that, the story opened again. Part 3. Merciless when the auditor told me about the off-site property, I didn't believe it at first. Why would a suburban HOA, meant to manage sidewalks, trash pickup, and community rules, have land registered under its name in a rural zip code hours away? But sure enough, there it was. Hidden in the digital backup of our 2019 financial archive was a scanned deed for a 3.2-acre lot, located nearly 100 miles from our neighborhood. The file had been tucked into a mislabeled folder labeled Fence Contractor Review. It was deliberate. Pornhub more suspicious? The land was purchased for $32,000. Psychologically, Trail, like many others, was murky. It didn't show up in any of the annual HOA budget summaries. But we found a one-line entry under a vague expense called Community Infrastructure Expansion. That wasn't even a category in our HOA charter. Someone had created it just for that transaction. We just had Robert Finch's signature on it. Robert Finch's giver lantern for other payment, supposedly on behalf of the HOA, and then never mentioned it to the board or the residents. There were no votes, no meeting notes, no discussion. He just did it. When all the HOAs did it was over too. I would see off to the head, it said MC. So, all taking graduation, of where is one racefully started. But when we know and is using my back, of his house, and not even noticed. So now, I have questions, a lot of them. I gathered my lawyer, the auditor, and Teresa, our current treasurer, and we drove out to the property. It took us over 2 hours, most of it on highways, then a rough gravel road surrounded by trees. Finally, we pulled up to a chain-link fence with a rusted padlock. Beyond it, nothing. Just wild brush, overgrown weeds, and a small collapsed shed near the center. Where is what really caught our attention? Stabilizer of the land was a sign, half buried in the grass, reading, Future site of HOA Training Center, coming 2020. I swear, I just stood there staring at it for a full minute. HOA Training Center? What the hell was that? We stepped around the fence, walked carefully through the weeds, and checked out the shed. Inside were leftover signs, a few rusted tools, and boxes full of blank HOA violation forms. Seriously, we're some to Denise. We're prostas restored, and plans so hell. We're walks, we're has. We're ever haven't seens. That's when it hit me. Where's what is? This was a staging ground. For documents. Fake citations, maybe even pre-written violation threats they could mail out en masse. And since it was off the grid, no resident would ever know where they came from or how they were processed. This wasn't just about scamming individuals. This was organized fraud. Robert was speak with HOA from River. Winstownsiang in the U.S. We know that I didn't know it all the trying to trace to our company. I was recording and I wasn't tried av. Robert was going the bone around. For master on the current board had ever approved or even heard of that line item. That meant money was still quietly leaving the HOA bank account, month after month, for land nobody knew about. It was criminal. But more than that, it was personal. Because when we went through those boxes, I found something that made my stomach drop. One of the blank violation slips was already filled out, with my name. KG, it was dated 6 months before I got my first actual letter from Denise. And it was for the same false reason. Unauthorized fence height, meaning they'd planned my scam in advance. It wasn't random. Killing it wasn't a mistake. I was targeted. Maybe because I'd paid dues on time. Maybe because I never attended meetings. Maybe because I seemed passive. But whatever the reason, they chose me deliberately and had the paperwork ready to go months in advance. That moment changed me. I wasn't just trying to protect the community anymore. I was going to bury everyone involved in this cover-up. I called the DA's office personally, not just a referral this time, a full briefing. I handed over the photos, the land deed, the printed forms, the payment trail, the tax records. The DA's investigator told me it was one of the most unusually coordinated schemes they'd seen tied to an HOA. A second round of indictments followed. This time, it wasn't just Robert and Denise. 3 additional former board members were named, one of whom had quietly moved out of state after the first wave of news broke. The charges? Misconspiracy of community funds, alphabetical, wire fraud, tax fraud. It was massive. Perpendicular, and it made the local news again, bigger than before. Disre headline? HOA land scam exposed. Hidden property, secret fines, and years of resident abuse. That night, I sat in my living room with the lights off, watching the segment play. I still had the letter from Denise in my desk drawer. I hadn't told the press about it. I wanted this to be about truth, not sympathy. I leaned back, finally exhaling. I'd won, right? Well, not quite. Because a few days later, someone knocked on my door.
It was a young man, probably early 20s, nervous, holding a thick envelope. "Are you the HOA guy?" he asked. I nodded. "I think you should have this. My mom worked for Robert. She never told anyone, but she kept these in a lockbox. Said, if anything..." Home. But it wasn't a dream. It was a money machine, built off the backs of people who trusted him. I thought it was over. I truly did. After uncovering the land scam, triggering a second round of arrests, and seeing Robert charged again, this time with felony-level conspiracy, I was sure the nightmare was behind me. I could finally rest. The neighborhood could finally breathe. But that envelope from the young man, Robert's former employee's son, changed everything. The photos inside painted a far darker picture than anything I had uncovered before. Yes, they confirmed the secret property. Yes, they showed Denise and Robert staging phony paperwork. But they also hinted at something more disturbing. There were more people involved. In one of the photos, a group of 5 individuals sat around a table inside the cabin on the hidden property. 2 were clearly Robert and Denise. The other 3? Unknown. I zoomed in. They weren't neighbors. At least not anyone I'd ever seen at meetings, events, or in the community directory. These weren't just rogue HOA staffers or board members. These were outsiders. One of them wore a badge. Another had a clipboard with inspection paperwork. That's when I realized the scam didn't stop at fake fines or hidden properties. They were creating a full network involving bogus city inspectors, private contractors, and even real estate agents, all designed to harass homeowners until they either paid up or moved out. Then they'd flip the property for profit. I needed help, for fast. I called the DA's office to a direct meeting with their investigator. I brought the photos, including the one with the badge. Within minutes, their faces went pale. They recognized the man. He wasn't a real inspector, but he had posed as one in 2 separate housing fraud investigations from other counties. Never formally charged, but known to them. A professional scam artist. My small neighborhood scam had now crossed into a multi-county criminal network. The 3rd investigation. This time, it wasn't just General's office got involved. They opened a task force to look into HOA fraud and real estate racketeering rings. Apparently, ours wasn't the only neighborhood where residents were being pushed out through fake citations, forced liens, and shady repair notices. It was a growing problem, and we had just exposed a playbook. Back in the middle of a full-blown legal storm, but that wasn't the only shock. White envelope slid under my door. No stamp, no return address, just one typed line inside. You don't know who you're messing with. I stared at it, my heart pounding. At first I thought it was a prank, a bad joke, but then I remembered. Robert wasn't just sitting quietly in a cell. He was trying to protect, still digging, that I had photos, that I wasn't stopping. The threat didn't scare me, not in the way they hoped, but it did something worse. It made me realize something I hadn't accepted until that moment. This went higher than I thought. Robert was just the neighborhood face, the safe guy, the fall guy maybe. But the people behind this, the real masterminds, weren't on HOA boards. They were businessmen, brokers, fake inspectors, people who built networks across towns to squeeze profit from residents who didn't know how to fight back. And I had accidentally kicked the whole thing over. The police took the note seriously. They offered to increase patrols near my house and even suggested I install exterior cameras. I already had them, but I added more. Front, back, alleyway, and even inside the HOA office. Caught someone trying to break in. The motion light came on around midnight. My cameras caught a man in a hoodie at the HOA office door, using a crowbar. He managed to pry it slightly open before a neighbor's dog barked and scared him off. I handed the footage to the police. He didn't steal anything, but it was clear. They wanted something inside the office. Maybe the old hard drives, maybe the unfiled citations, maybe the lease to the hidden property. I had moved everything off-site already, into a secure legal office downtown, but they didn't know that. Proof of intimidation. The DA's office filed a request to restrict Robert's communications. Apparently, even in jail, he had been using another inmate's phone access to message contacts on the outside. Back to a burner phone purchased near the hidden property. That was enough to bring him back into court. Not for a new charge, but for a violation of his sentencing conditions. He didn't say a word in court. At me. Didn't look at the judge. He just stood there as his deal was revoked and his sentence changed from 6 months in county to 4 years in state prison. It felt final. But here's the thing about taking down a scam like this. Every door you close opens another. Because the investigation didn't stop there. The task force uncovered 7 other communities where similar scams had taken place. Different names, different tactics, but the same core pattern. HOA citations that didn't match the books. Missing payments. Families pushed out of their homes. Coordinated. And now the state wanted me to testify. I was called in as a witness for a special hearing on HOA corruption and housing rackets. It was held at the Capitol, not in a courtroom, but a conference room lined with state officials, attorneys, and housing regulators. I told them everything. From the first fake violation on my non-existent fence, to the fake emails, to the shady land purchase, to the photos. They listened for 2 hours. Some took notes. Others looked. Shocked. One woman actually cried. When I finished, a housing commissioner leaned in and said, "You're not just the victim here. You're the reason this entire thing is unraveling." And I believed her. But even after that, and threats didn't stop.
from fake accounts. One said, "Drop it, or your house goes next." Another said, "You think you're helping. You're not. You're ruining something bigger." They thought I'd back down. I didn't. Instead, I filed a motion with my HOA board to terminate all ties with our previous legal firm, the one that used to represent us during Robert's term. Why? Because records showed they'd signed off on several emergency authorizations that helped mask the missing funds. Whether they were part of it or just negligent didn't matter. They were gone. We also updated our HOA charter to include something called the Homeowner's Bill of Rights, a list of protections every resident had, including the right to request full financial transparency, appeal violations with neutral parties, and never be fined without photo evidence and time-stamped documentation. It became law within the neighborhood. And then something happened that made it all feel real. We got mail from another neighborhood, a handwritten card signed by 14 families thanking us for blowing the lid off something we thought we had to live with forever. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me. This was a battle thousands of people were fighting, quietly behind their fences, behind their HOA notices, behind locked doors. I just got loud enough to be heard. Everything seemed stable again. Elijah had slowed. Robert was behind bars. The hidden property was seized and sold by court order, with the money returned to the HOA fund. Our neighborhood had become something of a symbol, a quiet community that stood up, fought back, and won. But nothing prepares you for betrayal from someone close. I was sitting in the HOA office one Friday evening, wrapping up the month-end report. I had a habit of staying late, partially because I liked the quiet, but also because I never fully trusted the locks. After what we'd been through, paranoia was just part of the routine. Around 8:30 p.m., Teresa walked in. Finalized the HOA treasurer, the same woman who had stood up during that first packed meeting and motioned to stop my eviction. She'd been my biggest supporter during the cleanup. We'd worked side by side, and I'd even started considering her a friend. She closed the door, locked it, and sat across from me. Didn't speak for a full minute. Then, she pulled out a flash drive and placed it on the desk. "I need you to see what's on this," she said, "before someone else does." I didn't understand. "What is it?" Proof that I wasn't innocent either. Plugged it in. Inside were dozens of scanned documents, checks, emails, signed work orders. Most of them were dated before Denise ever joined the HOA. And Teresa's name was on almost all of them. She had approved payments to the same contractors Robert used. She had co-signed purchase orders for landscaping services that never happened. She had vouched for the false infrastructure expansion entry, the same category used to buy the secret property. I looked at her, stunned. You were part of it?" She shook her head, slowly. "I was part of it, but not in the way you think." Displayed that at first, she truly believed the payments were legit. Robert had told her the HOA needed off-the-books services to meet emergency standards, that some of the work couldn't be publicly disclosed because it would interfere with future bids. It sounded weird, but Robert was convincing. Charming, even. Then the envelopes started arriving. Main times $500, sometimes more, labeled as consulting. At first, she thought it was a bonus. Then she realized she was being paid to stay quiet. She was too scared to stop. She admitted that by the time the Denise scam started, she was in too deep. She didn't know how to back out without exposing herself. That's why she pushed so hard to support me when I started fighting back. She hoped that helping me would somehow undo her role in it. It didn't. Now she has received a subpoena. The task force had pulled her financials. They were about to uncover everything. She could have deleted the documents, burned the flash drive, fled. But she didn't. She brought it to me. I sat in silence, a mix of rage, sadness, and confusion swirling inside me. This woman had helped me rebuild trust in the HOA. She'd helped reverse fines, approve refunds, and clean the books. And yet, she'd also been part of the mess that nearly ruined my life. I didn't yell. I didn't lash out. I just said, "You have to turn this in yourself." Neighboringed. She said she would, with the task force the next day.
Accidental face of it. I got invited to speak at housing reform panels. News outlets asked for interviews. Nonprofits wanted to partner. It felt surreal. Just a year ago, I was being threatened with eviction over a non-existent fence violation. Now I was helping write HOA reform legislation. But with visibility came exposure. I started noticing people following me again.
Not every day, not openly. Just shadows. A black car parked too long near my driveway. Someone standing outside the grocery store, staring until I looked back. Front door was slightly ajar when I came home. Nothing stolen, just open. Another warning. Blinked. But I wasn't afraid anymore. They didn't understand something crucial. I wasn't just trying to protect myself anymore. I was protecting thousands of people who couldn't fight this alone. Psychologist. That's when I made the decision. I stepped down as HOA president. Not because I was giving up, but because I needed to fight from outside the system. Within a week, I launched a nonprofit, HOA Truth Watch. Its mission was simple: expose corrupt HOA practices, to read, page A, and agently, discoveredly, offer legal guidance to scammed residents. And also considered to read, provide a database of verified citations and fines. Blackjack Radium and Moxie came. Push for legislative change at the state level. We had 10,000 members, volunteers, lawyers, activists, even whistleblowers. We created a submission portal, and the stories that came in were horrifying. An elderly couple was fined $25 a day for leaving a flower pot on their porch. A monogame, a veteran, threatened with foreclosure because his mailbox was the wrong shade of gray. A woman who lost her home after fake late fees pushed her into default. The home was flipped and resold to a cousin of the HOA president. And story after story of HOA boards that refused transparency, destroyed evidence, or partnered with sketchy vendors. We shared those stories anonymously, filed cases, fought back. Brainstorm. It wasn't safe, but it was worth it. This wasn't about fences, or grass height, or trash cans. It was about power, and what happens when a few people think they can control a community without accountability. I never expected to become the face of HOA reform. I started as a homeowner with a fake violation and a $3,000 scam. Now I was leading a nonprofit with members from across the country, homeowners, former board members, whistleblowers, and even HOA lawyers who were tired of seeing story closely and now volunteered with us as a document analyst. He was combing through the files related to Robert's old HOA account ledgers, trying to match up transaction patterns. One night, he sent me a simple text, fallback. "You need to see this. It's bigger than we thought." Tangled him immediately. He sounded breathless. "There's a second identity," Vernon said. "Robert had another name, a full alias, used to set up a private LLC. I asked, confused. "What name?" "Forgle Fields." Unpredictable, ballistic. That sounds like a fake name a kid would make up. "Right," Vernon said. "But it worked." He explained that in 2017, Robert had created an LLC under the name Ronald Fields, using a P.O. box in a town 3 hours away. The LLC was registered as a property inspection service, but Vernon traced nearly $220,000 in HOA payments made to it over 4 years, billed under vague services like external compliance checks and aesthetic review audits. Minimized were no service reports, no inspections, no deliverables, just checks. And they were signed off not only by Robert, but occasionally by Teresa. Even before she confessed, the paper trail showed she'd been signing these off for years. She might not have known who Ronald Fields was, but she certainly never asked. The final clue? The bank account linked to the LLC was still active. Not in Robert's name, not in the alias, but under the LLC's business account, tied to a small credit union just outside the city, a place nobody had thought to look. Forbes, that account still had over $91,000 in it. And by some miracle, it had never been frozen, stabilized, because the alias Ronald Fields was never mentioned during the criminal trials. The state had no idea it existed. We now had proof that Robert funneled HOA funds into a shell company under a false identity, then left that account intact. And even behind bars, he'd never mentioned it, possibly because he planned to access it once he got out. Berg, the moment we confirmed the routing number, I handed it all to the state investigators. But I knew we needed more than just paper. We needed access to the actual transactions. So I reached out to someone I never thought I would. Denise. That Denise. Still on probation, living quietly and trying to stay off the radar. I contacted her through her attorney and offered to meet, not to threaten her, not to punish her, but to ask for help. She agreed. In a quiet cafe halfway between our cities, it was awkward, tense, but also strangely calm. "And not proud of what I did," she said, "but I've got nothing to hide now." I explained everything, the alias, the fake LLC, the bank account. I asked her one question. "Did you ever hear the name Ronald Fields?" She didn't even flinch. Shed. "That's who he pretended to work for when homeowners asked who was reviewing their violations. He said Ronald Fields was his boss?" "Exactly. He told me, just say Ronald Fields handles the inspections. They'll never ask." I shook my head. "Nope," she said. "People just nodded and paid." With her help, we confirmed 2 more checks made out to Ronald Fields. One of them was mine. From that original $3,000 scam, it had been cashed into the fake LLC account. That was the final nail. We submitted the new findings to the task force. They immediately filed an emergency injunction to freeze the account and seize the remaining funds. Robert's plea deal was revisited again. Even from behind bars, his list of crimes was growing. But more importantly, the money wasn't lost. Blinked, the state returned the $91,000 to the HOA's emergency fund.
It was the first time in our community's history that money was recovered from a scam and put back into the hands of the residents. I gave a speech at the next HOA town hall. I wasn't president anymore, but I was asked to say a few words. This is what I said. We were lied to, used, threatened, but we didn't quit. We didn't look away. We stood up, and we pulled the truth into the light. This isn't just a win for our neighborhood. This is a win for every family who ever got a fake fine, for every person who was too scared to fight back. We are the proof that when a community works together, even the most powerful fraud can be taken down. The room erupted in applause. Pedestrians who never smiled much gave me a standing ovation. That night, I walked home alone. No cameras, no emails, no noise. Just me. And the porch light. I was finally free to leave on past 10 p.m. without fear of a violation letter in the mail. Final update. We had taken down a fraud. We had recovered stolen money. We had even put people in prison. And yet, somehow, the deeper we dug, the more we realized we had only kicked over the first layer of rot. Everything changed later, the cease and desist letter. When it first landed on my doorstep, I almost ignored it. Just another attempt to silence us, I figured. I'd received anonymous threats before, plenty of them. People throwing shade, cowards hiding behind burner emails, vague, "you're in danger" voicemails. But this had teeth. The envelope was thick, formal, printed with a Manhattan law firm's name I didn't recognize. Inside were pages of carefully worded legal threats. Cease all defamatory statements. Remove any and all reference to our client, Bright Lane Holdings, LLC. Never published it. Yet here they were, accusing me and HOA Truthwatch of causing irreparable reputational harm. It was Vernon who figured it out. I forwarded the letter to him late that night. He called me the next morning and said, "This isn't random. This is the spider's web." I didn't understand what he meant, yet. He showed me a corporate structure map he had quietly been building for weeks. It started with known HOA contractors, the ones Robert and Denise had used. Then he traced their corporate registrations. Some were filed in Delaware, some in Nevada, some through legal proxies. But they all led back, ultimately, to a massive parent company, Bright Lane Holdings, LLC. Not a company you'd ever see on a violation notice. Not one you'd ever think about. But they controlled over 200-plus subsidiaries across the country. Firms with innocent names like Hailed Sunbeam Property Services, Airlines, Answer Code Compliance, Deactivate, Vladi HOA Solutions, More Than Inside Group. One of these companies was just a legal alias. Paperwork, a name. But behind all of them was the same set of people controlling billions of dollars in HOA management contracts, real estate flipping operations, and compliance enforcement programs. Froze when I saw the name and Vantage were the exact companies that Robert used to justify multiple checks from our HOA budget. We had paid tens of thousands of dollars to Bright Lane-owned entities, and we never even knew it. They didn't want us to publish the truth, because it wasn't just about our little neighborhood anymore. This was nationwide, and we had just kicked the door open. Bright Lane's first cease and desist turned into 2, then 3. Their strategy was clear: drown us in paperwork, bury us in legal fear, and force us to fold under pressure. But here's what they didn't know. Our team wasn't afraid. We had a retired judge advising us now, a team of volunteer attorneys. Vernon had uncovered fake W-9 forms used to process third-party inspection fees, identical templates used across at least 17 states. Each time the company name was changed, but the form content, signature block, and fee structure were identical. They weren't even careful anymore. They assumed no one would look. They didn't count on us. So we went on offense. We filed a formal ethics complaint with the state bar against the law firms representing Bright Lane. Why? Because their legal threats referenced documents that we had never published, never leaked, and never shared publicly. They were tipping their hand, admitting that they had internal knowledge of our investigation, meaning someone was either spying on our internal communications, or they were scared because we were close to blowing it wide open. Then something strange happened. We received an anonymous tip. No return address. Just one sticky note. Look at the calendar and ask why. Inside were hundreds of internal calendar invites from a Bright Lane email server. Meetings between executives, strategy calls, quarterly planning sessions. But most chilling of all, several calendar invites titled Reclaim Strategy, Forced Compliance Home Exit, Phase 3. We opened the event notes. There it was. Clear language that described how to systematically target non-compliant residents, apply staggered escalating violation fines, and utilize third-party lien placements to create buyout opportunities. In plain English, they were forcing people out of their homes, then flipping those properties for profit using their own internal real estate agents. Families, seniors, single parents. Anyone who either couldn't fight back or didn't know their rights. We now had proof. We forwarded to the state task force. This time, it wasn't just about HOA fraud. It was racketeering. A criminal enterprise designed to extract value from homeowners using manufactured fines and hidden shell companies. Then came the federal interest. A senator from California invited us to speak at a housing committee hearing.
I brought Vernon, our legal team, and printed copies of everything. The Ronald Fields account, the fake citations, the forced exit strategy. The committee room was packed. I told them my story. The fake fine, the $3,000 demand, the attempted eviction, the fake inspector, the land, the money, the betrayal, the intimidation, the lawsuits, all of it. And I ended with this. This is about power. This is about a system that lets private companies operate with zero accountability while punishing families for the color of their mulch. It's time to change that. The room was silent. Then came the applause. The senator promised action. 3 weeks later, they introduced the Homeowner Transparency and Rights Act, the first federal bill aimed directly at regulating HOAs, management companies, and third-party enforcement contractors. Among its proposals, a national database of HOA violations, contractual required third-party audits of all HOA financials over $100,000. Brian, turbulence disclosure of corporate contractors to all residents, federal oversight of all eviction processes tied to HOA action, whistleblower protection for any board members or residents who speak out. Wasn't law yet, but it was real, and it was already gaining co-sponsors. We had done it. The final piece hadn't dropped. Misplaced that anonymous tipster? They reached out again. This time with a voice message, digitally scrambled, but the words were clear. You haven't found the offshore account yet. Ronald Fields had a backup, Cayman Islands. Look at the white. Consequently, one of the scanned PDFs from Teresa's old files, a line item that made no sense. Ambiguous policy fee, $4,250, outbound transfer. Negligence. It happened 2 days after Robert's second court hearing, 2 days after his sentence was extended. Someone had moved money offshore, even while he was in jail. We brought it to the FBI. That case, still open. But it confirmed what we'd always feared. This wasn't just about fake letters and shady violations. This was a multi-million-dollar real estate crime ring operating under the protection of bland HOA newsletters and board elections no one ever paid attention to. And it had gone unchecked for years. Now, we're not just fighting for refunds anymore. We're fighting for justice, for full-scale reform. And we won't stop until the last name behind the last LLC is exposed. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been fined, evicted, or silenced in the name of community standards. This started with a $3,000 scam over a fake fence violation, a federal investigation into a nationwide real estate racketeering ring. Funny how things go. Blindness now, our story had become national. HOA Truth Watch was on the radar of lawmakers, investigators, and homeowners from coast to coast. People were waking up, looking at their neighborhoods with fresh eyes, reading their citations carefully, digging into contracts, names, signatures. The fear was gone. We had taken down the shell companies. We had mapped the aliases. We had even discovered the offshore account connected to the alias Ronald Fields. The story should have ended with the indictments, with the lawsuits, with the headlines. There was still one more chapter left. Right Lane Holdings. It didn't happen the way I expected. Not with handcuffs. Not with a televised FBI raid. It started with a shareholder leak. Blinked, one of Bright Lane's minority investors, a woman named Catherine, anonymously reached out to our legal team through an encrypted email server we'd set up for whistleblowers. She said she had everything. Internal audits, meeting transcripts, emails, payoff records, even fake identities. We arranged a meeting through her attorney. She met us in D.C., sitting in a hotel conference room with her hands shaking. She looked tired, worn down, but determined. But over time, she started seeing red flags, spreadsheets showing violations being forecasted like revenue, profit margins directly tied to how many residents were fined per month, documents showing executives coaching HOA presidents on how to maximize enforcement gains. But the worst part? Fleece of government officials accepting consulting fees from Bright Lane stopped this years ago. This wasn't just corporate abuse. This was coordinated influence and obstruction. We brought the files straight to the DOJ. Blackmail? Finally, the hammer dropped. Over the next 6 months, Bright Lane Holdings became the subject of a multi-agency federal probe. The SEC, IRS, DOJ, HUD, all involved. Assets were frozen, subpoenas sent, CEOs called to testify before Congress. They tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, a mismanagement issue, a rogue division. But the files didn't lie, and neither did the people they had hurt. Victims came forward by the hundreds. Elderly couples who had lost their homes, families forced to move, veterans fined until they defaulted. It wasn't just our neighborhood anymore. It was happening in over 75 communities in 15 different states. Some of the stories were worse than mine. One woman in Arizona had a miscarriage during the stress of her eviction. A disabled man in Florida was fined $50 a day for excessive flag display, all for flying a veterans banner on his porch. One single mom in Texas paid over $11,000 in fake was auctioned off to a Bright Lane affiliated buyer. They had built a business on cruelty. And finally, they were paying for it. Bright Lane was dissolved by court order. The founders were indicted on fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering charges. Several state-level officials faced ethics investigations. And a class action suit involving over 10,000 residents was certified in federal court. The damages?
estimated at over $250 million. Our little story had turned into a national reckoning. As for me, I moved. Not because I had to, but because I needed peace. After 3 years of fighting, documenting, investigating, testifying, and building something bigger than I ever imagined, I needed to rest. I bought a small cabin house 2 hours north of the city. No HOA, no fake citations, no board meetings or violation letters, just trees, wind, and silence. But HOA Truthwatch didn't stop. We had a board now, full-time staff, a legal team, our own newsletter. We helped write 3 new bills that were passed in different states, and we were still fighting. Then, one day, out of nowhere, I got a letter. A real letter, no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a check. The paper had 2 lines. You were right. You was weak, but you were strong. The check? For $3,000. Priesthood. Signed, T. Caldwell. Plunge. After everything, she paid me back. I don't know about everything. About Robert. About Denise. About Teresa. About the anonymous tipster. About Catherine. About the thousands of people who had trusted us with their stories. And I thought about who I was the day this all began. Just another homeowner opening a letter about a fake fence. Kemp, I had no idea I would end up here. But if you're reading this, maybe you're standing at your own starting point. Maybe you just got a strange citation, or a confusing fee, or a notice that doesn't feel right. And maybe, like me, you're wondering if fighting back is worth it. Let me tell you this. Forged, it is. Because the truth matters. Because your home matters. Because people like us, the quiet ones, the rule followers, the peaceful neighbors, we are stronger than we know. And when we stand together, even the biggest, most corrupt system in the country can fall. Like and subscribe for more stories.